Here's Fernando Torres. Fantastic shot! Absolutely wonderful goal! He is unstoppable!
Fernando Torres for a period of time was considered the best striker in the world. During his period of dominance, he made a lot of great defenders look silly, and only a few could contain him. This was obviously during his time at Liverpool. The fans loved him, and Torres provided many special moments for them. From fantastic goals to helping Liverpool get close to the league title in the 2008-09 season. Some may have thought that Fernando Torres was on his way to become a Liverpool legend. Unfortunately for Liverpool, by 2010, they missed out on the Champions League, hired Roy Hodgson as manager, and had big problems with their owners. Hodgson was eventually sacked, new owners arrived, and Torres was sold to Chelsea, for at the time a British record transfer fee. But what if someone convinced Torres to stay until the end of his contract? What if Torres partnered with a young Suarez and took on the Premier League? How different would things be? We all know the disastrous time Torres had at Chelsea, although he did win silverware that Liverpool still haven't. So what if Fernando Torres never left Liverpool? The transfer market is a major component to football, and many players would be affected by Torres staying at Liverpool. Andy Carroll would likely have stayed at Newcastle, as it seems he was only bought because Torres was sold. Carroll was performing well for Newcastle, and had an injury when he went to Liverpool. He didn't score as many at Liverpool, so would that be the same if he never left Newcastle? Since he'd be more comfortable at Newcastle, he probably would have scored more goals, but his future injury problems were likely unavoidable, no matter what club he'd be at. Another result of this is that Liverpool's record transfer fee would not have been broken until Adam Lallana in 2014. Liverpool's transfers would likely be unaffected for the 11-12 season, unless if the Torres-Suarez partnership was good enough to gain 10 points. The only notable change is Daniel Sturridge not being signed in 2013, but I could see him still arriving, as by the time he would sign, Torres would be on his last 6 months of his contract. It's tough to say if Chelsea would buy another striker if they failed to get Torres. They were linked with Sergio Aguero at the time. If that happened, City would need a striker. During the window Aguero was bought, some strikers City were rumored to be looking at were forwards like Moussa Sow, Gervinho, Cavani, and maybe Zlatan. With Zlatan more likely going to Milan, the only other striker on the list that could help City win the league would be Cavani, and Napoli were unlikely to sell him at the time. Unfortunately, if Aguero went to Chelsea, we wouldn't have the memorable Aguero moment. Would Manchester City win the Premier League? If they got someone close to Aguero's level, it's possible, but we have to remember that City won the league on the last shot of the season. Aguero at Chelsea would probably help them reach the top 4 that season, and they'd probably still do well in the Champions League as well. Transfer-wise, Torres staying at Liverpool would potentially change a lot, but what about his performances? Saying that Torres' performances for Chelsea was bad would be an understatement. 110 league appearances with only 20 goals to show for, seeing him score was a rarity.
Fresh controversy surrounds Fernando Torres this morning when a man made himself known to the authorities claiming he witnessed the Chelsea striker actually scoring a goal. The man, who may be sectioned for his preposterous story, spoke exclusively to Special One TV.
Yes, I saw him score, I am sure of it.
What did this man look like?
His hair was more floppy, he was wearing a red shirt.
Even though he scored a lot with Liverpool, how much different would Torres perform if he stayed at Liverpool? He'd be partnering with Suarez, who just a year prior had a good, but controversial World Cup. They definitely could have coexisted, just look at Sturridge and Suarez. There were reports of Sturridge and Suarez not getting along, but they still scored a lot of goals. The only problem is would Torres perform? In his seasons prior to the 2010 World Cup, Torres' Premier League goal rate was incredible, 56 goals in 79 games. The season after the World Cup, he scored 9 and 23 in his last season with Liverpool, which was alright. That drastically went down to 1 goal in 14 with Chelsea in the same season. Sounds like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde scenario. Many people suggested that this was due to confidence. Torres did say on his time at Chelsea that I likened to swimming with wet clothes on. The $50 million transfer fee added a lot of pressure, and with a string of bad performances, the pressure must have been too much to handle. Another factor may have been Torres' injury problems. He never had an injury where he was out for 6 months, or something like that. However, he did have some knee problems twice in the season prior to the World Cup, including a second knee operation. He struggled in the World Cup, wasn't at his best at Liverpool, and struggled at Chelsea. Could that have been the reason for his eventual slowdown? It might have impacted him a little, as his goal scoring at Liverpool wasn't as good as previous seasons. Then again, Roy Hodgson was the manager. It also could have been a combination of both the surgery and the eventual pressure. Now if he stayed, that pressure would be gone. But I doubt Torres would ever get back to where he was prior to the World Cup. Torres would do better at Liverpool, and if he stayed until the end of his contract, it wouldn't be crazy saying 30-35 goals in 80-something matches. How would this affect Liverpool's league positions? By the end of the 2010-11 season, it's hard to see how they'd get top 4, even with Torres. They originally finished 10 points off the top 4, and dropped 14 points after Torres left, which was pretty good compared to the first half of the season. Torres also wasn't in charge of Liverpool's transfers, so he wouldn't have a say in the moves that were made in the following summer. If you're a Liverpool fan, most of these transfers are ones you want to forget. The Premier League season was one to forget too. 17 points off the top 4 was horrendous, and if Torres stayed, maybe they would have passed Everton. But that Liverpool squad, bar a few players, was brutal compared to Rafa Benitez's team. Torres staying and all the transfers affected by his move would have affected Liverpool's FA Cup run, but the Football League Cup? Not as much. Carroll was involved in Liverpool's run to win the trophy, but only scored against Exeter in the early rounds.
The FA Cup run was different. Without his goal against Everton, Liverpool would need someone else to step up. Would that have been Torres? Possibly, but you could say that the game would have ended in extra time or penalties. The final season of his contract unfortunately wouldn't have helped Liverpool much either. 12 points off the top 4 without Torres, and even if he stayed and had a good season, say 15 to 20 goals, that would have taken away from Daniel Sturridge's 10 goals if they decided to sign him.
In the end, not much would have changed for Liverpool. It seems like it was best for Torres to leave Liverpool. He ended up winning the FA Cup, Europa League, and most important of all, the Champions League. If he stayed at Liverpool, he likely would have won the Football League Cup, and potentially the FA Cup. After Rafa Benitez left, Liverpool were put in a bad situation. The owners at the time were incompetent, the manager was clueless, and unfortunately, hiring a Liverpool legend like Kenny Dalglish was not beneficial for the club in the long term. Poor transfers were made, and those wouldn't have changed that much if Torres stayed. The club were never close to the top 4, and at the time, that was the best way to attract better players. Although individually Torres had a nightmare at Chelsea, if he stayed at Liverpool, he would have been loved by the fans for his loyalty, but Liverpool wouldn't have won the Premier League with Torres after 2010, and certainly not a Champions League. In the end, it's best not to change history for this scenario.